Next slide, please. Now, before I review the agenda and transition to our updates, I want to first announce that interpretation services will be provided this evening by Zoom and by phone line. I will walk through a few instructions on how to utilize this service this evening, and then we will have our interpreter, Laura, provide guidance in Spanish. To change your language settings, please select the interpretation button. This button has a global icon on it and is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Click on the global icon to change it to the language that you prefer or are most comfortable with. Tonight, you will have Spanish and English as your options. To only hear the interpreted language, please click Mute Original Auto. I will now invite our interpreter, Laura, to share these instructions in Spanish. Laura?
Buenas noches, gracias por participar en esta reunión. Para escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor, opriman el icono que está en la figura de globo a la parte inferior de su pantalla. Una vez que opriman el icono, pueden seleccionar el idioma español y podrán escuchar toda la reunión en español. También tienen que cerrar el idioma inglés. Tienen que bajar el volumen y eso se presentará en la pantalla. Gracias.
Gracias, Laura. Okay, I will now review the agenda very quickly so you can get a sense of what information we have for you this evening. Next slide, please. We have gone through our welcome and our interpretation services. Our first presentation will be an update on the Phase 2 State Oil and Gas Well Abandonment provided by CalGEM. We will then have the California Air Resources Board provide an update on the potential amendments to the oil and gas methane regulation. Following this is the continuation of the California Air Resources Board's updates, in which they'll also provide an update on Senate Bill 1137, the Leak Detection Response Plan. And before we transition to public comment, I will share how you can contact the Methane Task Force team and how to stay informed. And then lastly, we will transition into our final agenda item, which is the public comment segment. I will provide a few instructions on how we will conduct the public comment to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to share. Please note now that we will be allowing the time and space for questions, comments, and concerns to be shared. However, we will not be answering questions at this time. I will mention this again towards the end of our presentations. You will be provided with a handful of resources for where to direct your questions and acquire answers via our FAQ page and Methane Task Force contact information. With that said, we will conclude tonight's meeting around 6:30 p.m. Next slide, please. Thank you again for being here with us this evening, and I will now turn it over to our first presenter. Robert, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Jamie. Good evening, everybody. I'm Robert Schaff. I'm part of the California Geologic Energy Management Division of the California Department of Conservation, or CalGEM. I'm the manager of the State Abandonment Program, and I'd like today to just give a quick review of the program itself, and then talk about the Phase 2 program, our final expenditure plan of that program. Next slide, please. So to give you a quick background about the State Well Abandonment Program, there are approximately 5,300 likely orphan oil and gas wells across the state of California. An orphan well is one where the operator has deserted the well and left and doesn't have the financial ability to abandon the well, and it's been left to the state to abandon that well. We've known about this problem for a number of years, but until recently, we haven't had the funds available to start tackling this problem. We now have funds available both from the state and from federal grants in order to abandon wells across the state of California. We do have quite a bit of funds, but they are still not enough to tackle all these wells, but at least they'll give us a first step towards starting to address this problem. Next slide, please. So today I'd like to talk about the phase two final expenditure plan. We're underway with phase one of the wells, and so now we're getting ready to move into phase two and have those wells ready to go as soon as we finish phase one. For phase two, our selection process was to focus on the remaining high-risk wells across the state. So we took the wells that we didn't include in phase one that are considered high risk and identified them along with wells that are in close proximity to those high-risk wells to include in the phase two. We included these wells close proximity because we want to improve the efficiency of the program and do as many wells as possible with the funds that we have available. Next slide, please. With that, we identified 205 wells across the state. And of those 205 wells, 101 of them, or 49% of them, are located in disadvantaged communities. This exceeds our objective of having 40% in disadvantaged communities, but that objective is we're going to continue to have it 40% or more in each of the phases that of this program, and as we have in phase one and we will in future phases. As you can see from the map, the wells in phase two cover quite a large area of the state. They go from as far south as San Diego County to wells that are well north of Sacramento. And they cover a vast area and quite a number of counties. Next slide, please. We did present this the draft expenditure plan at our July methane task force meeting. The expenditure plan has not really changed that much. There's only real small changes that we made were, one, we removed the Kern Front wells near Bakersfield that were on the list originally. Those wells are still going to be abandoned, but they're going to be abandoned under a separate state program. We've added wells in Tulare County that used to be operated by Binion Exploration and Development. And then we've also added additional wells in Kern County that used to be operated by Zinergy and Sunray that we identified after we submitted the draft plan. These wells in Kern County are near other wells that were already included in the draft expenditure plan. And so we wanted to get all the wells in the area as part of the phase two program. Next slide, please. So to talk about progress to date, we've had a 30-day comment period in which we received the comments from the public. Fortunately, most of them were very supportive of the program. And we did have some people asking additional questions about the program, which we are working to address. But in general, we had lots of support, which was good. And so that helped us to be able to proceed forward with the phase two program. We've started the environmental review process. The CEQA review is been initiated, and we're going to look at include all the wells as part of a CEQA review to make sure that we're not affecting any environmental issues that are out there. We're also having initial site assessments moving forward to identify any potential hazards that might exist at any of these sites. As far as well management goes, part of the process is that we need to issue a plug and abandonment order on these orphan wells that we plan to abandon as part of phase two and get those finalized before we can actually do the work. That work is well underway and it's being near completion so that when we have all the other elements of the program ready to go, we'll have the plug and abandonment orders in place, and so we can proceed with them. And with that, go on to the next slide, please. That really concludes my part of the effort, just to let you know that we are moving forward with the program and we're continuing to make progress on getting these wells ready to go for abandonment and be able to start the process. Thank you. Back to you, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Robert, for that in-depth update. I really appreciate it. We're now going to transition to an update from the California Air Resources Board on the potential amendments to CARB's oil and gas methane regulation. Jim, when you're ready, please begin.
All right. Thanks, Jamie. Hi, my name is Jim Nyrotty. I'm the manager of the oil and gas section here at the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. And I'm going to talk today about some potential amendments we're going to be making to our oil and gas methane regulation. You may remember that we made changes to this regulation last year, and it looks like because of some action that US EPA has taken, that we'll be making these amendments, making some more amendments to the reg next year, and we've started that process. Next slide, please. Okay, a little bit of background. Some of you may already know this, but just for all those who are new to it, the CARB's oil and gas methane regulation was adopted in 2017. And as I mentioned, we amended it last year in 2023. It's actually meant to be a complement to the local air pollution control district rules on oil and gas that already exist for controlling VOC, or volatile organic compound emissions, since VOCs are precursors to ground level ozone, which is a main contributor to smog. And those rules have been around 30 or 40 years in some cases. So what our regulation was designed to do is to address the areas that are not covered by local air district rules to control methane emissions. And these, there's probably three big areas that really encompasses. It's natural gas underground storage facilities, natural gas transmission compressor stations, and natural gas production wells and other equipment that are not associated with oil production. So in other words, they're just pulling natural gas out of the ground without oil. That's mostly in Northern California, but those are the three big areas. There's some other areas that are exempt from some district rules that our regulation controls, but those are the big areas that our reg is involved with. And so for the last 7 or 8 years, this regulation has been jointly implemented and enforced by the local air districts and ourselves at CARB. Next slide, please. So just as a refresher, I was going to go over some of the main requirements in our regulation. This isn't all of them, but in the interest of time, I just want to highlight some of the key ones. The one most people are familiar with is the requirement on the operators to conduct quarterly leak detection and repair, or LDAR. I'll be calling it LDAR. And that is what it, that is going around, and the operators have to essentially inspect with some kind of monitoring device all the flanges and valves and threaded connections at a facility 4 times a year. Our reg also required controls on uncontrolled tanks, in other words, vapor control on those tanks that were over a certain methane threshold. But our rule also required the replacement of high emitting seals on both centrifugal and reciprocating compressors. Next slide, please. And the rule also required for pneumatic devices, or process controllers, as they're sometimes called, to be non-emitting or zero emissions. We did have some exceptions to that, and I'll talk about those later, since those are the ones that have to go away in our new amendments. We also, kind of in light of some legislation that was passed soon after the Aliso Canyon event, had to add some additional monitoring of natural gas underground storage facilities into our regulation, including ambient monitoring of methane, as well as daily inspections instead of quarterly inspections for the wellheads there. And then the new thing that got added last year, besides some other cleanup changes that were made to the reg, was that we added a provision to require operators to mitigate plumes of methane that we see through our satellites that we are involved with. And one of those satellites just launched this summer. The second one is hopefully going to launch by the end of the year. And beginning next year, we'll start seeing images that we will be sending to operators to have them find and fix and mitigate those emissions that are found by satellite. So that's an exciting new provision in our reg. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so why are we opening up our reg again and amending it? Well, the main reason is because the US EPA published new requirements for both new and existing oil and gas facilities. And in March of this year, they published what they call the emission guidelines, which are requirements that all states must implement to reduce the methane emissions from existing oil and gas sources. And even though our reg contains a lot of these provisions that EPA incorporated into their rules, there are some that we are going to have to tighten up in order to fully comply with these emission guidelines, as they're called. And even though it sounds like it's a long time away, we do have to get this revised rule to US EPA by March of 2026, which is kind of fast in California regulatory timeframes, but that's our plan to do that. Next slide, please. So what are some of the changes that we're going to have to be making to our reg to comply with these EPA emission guidelines? There are a lot. I'm going to focus on just the main ones here on the next couple slides. Well, like I mentioned, the pneumatic devices or process controllers, we had a couple exceptions in there for some pre-existing low bleed, as they're called, pneumatics and intermittent bleed pneumatics, and those will have to go away to no bleed or zero emission pneumatics. So that's a big change. Another big change will be that even though most rules in the state district rules do not allow for just venting of associated gas, the emission guidelines ban that completely. And so there is one area that we know of that is still allowed is what are called open well casing vents in some cases, in some wells, for production reasons, have the well casing vents open. So that's just emitting methane straight into the air. So those will either have to be captured and controlled or just closed. So that's a big step. We will also have to lower the leak concentration in our reg from 1,000 parts per million to 500 parts per million. A lot of district rules already are that low, but we'd have to lower ours. The emission guidelines rules also require allowing for alternative LDAR approaches that get equivalent emission reductions. In this case, we would simply point to the approved list that US EPA has. So in other words, rather than reinvent the wheel, if a vendor has been approved as an alternative by US EPA, they'd automatically meet that in our regulation. Next slide, please. Another thing we're going to have to reconsider is, as everyone is familiar probably in this group, there's exemptions in our regulation and in local air district rules for heavy oil being exempted from LDAR because of the small emissions from heavy oil. So we're going to have to re-examine that in this rulemaking as well, just because there's really the US EPA doesn't even consider heavy oil since it's somewhat unique to California. So there is no such thing as a blanket exemption like that. We also will have to put an actual emissions limit on for dry seals from centrifugal compressors. In our current reg, we essentially, if you have a dry seal, you comply with the wet seal standard that we have. So we're going to have to require people to actually go out and measure their dry seals. And then also US EPA has what they call a super emitter program, which is very similar to our satellite emission plume provision that we just added. So we're working with US EPA to see if we just have to mention the super emitter program so that operators know that it exists, or if we have to somehow coordinate those two. And so we're still working with US EPA staff on that topic. Next slide, please. So here's the anticipated rulemaking timeline. And of course, this is draft. It's a tentative timeline. But as you remember, I said we have to get the amended rule to US EPA in March of 2026. So working backward from that date and knowing how long things take in our process, there's a lot of public process aspects to our reg development. It looks like we're going to have to bring it to our board by October of 2025. So backing up from that date, we have to have some workshops. We actually had a workshop this past August, a few months ago, as an initial one where we were mostly asking for initial feedback, as well as anyone who had cost information on some of those potential changes I went over. We will be having more workshops as the process goes on. I don't know if we're going to be able to get one in on this rest of this calendar year, but definitely early next year. We have to have the next one will probably have to do with draft language that we're proposing. One thing that's driving a lot of what we're doing right now is what's called a standardized regulatory impact assessment, or SRIA, that we have to turn into the Department of Finance early next year, January of 25. And that's kind of like a socioeconomic analysis of not only how much will our regulation cost operators and the public and government, but also just how does it ripple throughout the economy, economy-wide in California. And so that's why we're working right now on a cost estimates and so on. And that's what's keeping us busy right now to get that to Department of Finance early next year. And to meet that October 25 timeframe for a board hearing, we have to release our proposed regulatory package sometime in May of 2025. And that starts a 45-day comment period. Assuming we have to make some changes based on those comments, we'll have to submit or publish a revised regulatory package sometime in September of 2025. And this again all goes towards having a board hearing where the public can comment in October of 2025. And that allows us enough time to get our final regulatory package to what's called our Office of Administrative Law. We have to get it to them by January of 2026 so that they can approve it, and we will be able to submit it to US EPA by that March 9th, 2026 timeframe. So I know I was saying a lot, but that's really just to give you an idea of how much we have to start right now. We've already started. So those are the key dates I put down there. Next slide, please. So yeah, this will be my last slide, and really what I want to encourage people to do is subscribe to our email list, and I know that link will get put into the chat, because that's how you find out about when our next workshop is. You get noticed about the board hearing and the release of the package and so on. So it's really important to be on that listserv email list. And then if you have any questions as we're going through this process, I've put up one of the lead staff person's email there, Kelly Yon here at ARB at CARB. And also we are definitely available to have meetings either individually or a group. We're happy to have them in Sacramento, or we can come to where you are to have any kind of one-on-one meetings, or with groups of folks. And also contact Kelly to try to set up those meetings that you're interested in. So with that, that's the end of my presentation, and I'll turn it back to Jamie.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim, for that very robust update, as well as providing information on how to stay informed and who to contact. And I also want to direct participants' attention to the chat, as a couple of different links have been dropped in there that you may find useful as well. Next slide, please. All right, we are transitioning to our next presenter, staying in the same vein with the California Air Resources Board. We will be covering SB 1137, Leak Detection and Response Plan Update, and Lou would Lou will be providing this update. And when you're ready, Lou, please present.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Good evening, everybody. My name is Lou Dinkler, and I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of the SB 1137 implementation team with the California Air Resources Board. Tonight, I would like to provide a brief update on California Senate Bill 1137, specifically the rulemaking timeline and process associated with leak detection and response plans that are required under this law. Next slide. You may recall from prior methane task force meetings that Senate Bill 1137 establishes health protection zones around sensitive receptors located within 3,200 feet of oil and gas production wells and production facilities. SB 1137 was signed into law by Governor Newsom in September of 2022, but implementation was put on hold due to a referendum that qualified for the November 2024 general election ballot. That referendum was withdrawn in late June of 2024, and the law went into immediate effect. SB 1137 bans the development of new oil and gas wells in the health protection zone, and also requires operators of existing oil and gas wells within the zone to develop and submit a leak detection and response plan. Statewide, we estimate about 28,000 oil and gas production wells are located within the HPZ, or the protection zone. Again, the focus of tonight's presentation will be on the leak detection and response plan segment of the law. Next slide, please. The leak detection and response plans must include 4 key components as follows: installation of a continuously operating emission detection system to provide rapid detection of leaks, an effective and reliable alarm system that alerts the operator when those leaks are detected, a response protocol that provides for the rapid identification and repair of those leaks, and lastly, provisions for notifying local communities when the leak source cannot be identified or fixed within 48 hours. Next slide, please. Under SB 1137, CARB responsibilities are highlighted or summarized here. Number 1, CARB will develop a regulation to implement and set performance standards for the continuously operating emission detection system that is required. The plans must identify the chemical constituent to be monitored and the leak detection threshold. Number 2, with concurrence with CalGEM, CARB will review and either approve or deny the leak detection response plan. If a plan is denied, a notice of deficiency will be provided to the operator, who must suspend production activities until those items are addressed. Number 3, CARB will work with CalGEM to develop methods for providing public access to the emissions data that is generated by the operators. Next slide, please. So earlier in this presentation, I mentioned that implementation was suspended during the referendum process. Now that that referendum has been withdrawn, Assembly Bill 218 was passed to allow time for CARB and the other involved agencies to meet their statutory requirements under SB 1137. For CARB, AB 218 allowed more time for us to develop robust performance standards for the leak detection and response plans. Those new implementation dates are provided in this table. July 1st, 2028 is the deadline for operators to submit their leak detection and response plans. July 1st, 2029 is the deadline for CARB upon concurrence with CalGEM, to either approve or deny the plan. July 1, 2030 is the deadline for operators to implement the plan, meaning that the continuously operating emission detection system must be up and running. In terms of regulatory development, this means that CARB is seeking to establish an effective date of the regulation prior to July 1st, 2028. In other words, we are operating under a 3-year time frame to develop this regulation. As of today, we are very much in the preliminary stages of the rulemaking process, and we are using this opportunity to introduce ourselves to the Methane Task Force, and we welcome and encourage your engagement. Currently, our team is reviewing the requirements of existing leak detection and response. Currently, our team is reviewing the requirements of existing leak detection and repair rules and regulations. We are also looking at the viability of chemical constituents as serving as surrogates, and we are evaluating commercially available monitoring technologies that may be used to meet the requirements of the plans. In addition to participating in these methane task force meetings, CARB's rulemaking process provides several opportunities for public participation and stakeholder engagement. CARB will host public workshops, and once we develop our rulemaking package, our staff report, and our draft regulatory language, we will initiate a 45-day public comment period. We will also schedule a board hearing that will all be part of the development of the SB 1137 regulations. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the last slide of my presentation. We have established a dedicated email address to accept your feedback. That email address is listed here, and it's just been posted to the chat. That is SB 1137 implementation@arb.ca.gov. We are also available for meetings with groups or individuals, so please reach out via this email address. With that, that concludes my presentation, and thank you, everyone. We appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight, and we look forward to working with you on this important and impactful regulation. Jamie, back to you.
Thank you so much, Lou, for your presentation. Really appreciate you for being here this evening and providing that information, as well as a contact email address for folks to utilize. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we transition to public comment, because we're very interested in hearing from you this evening, I want to first share how you can contact the Methane Task Force team with any questions and/or comments that may not get raised or addressed this evening, and of course, how you can stay informed. So to contact the Methane Task Force team, you will email that address listed on the screen here, which is methanetaskforce@conservation.ca.gov. Similarly, if you'd like to receive updates regarding the Methane Task Force, you can email methanetaskforce@conservation.ca.gov to request and subscribe to the Methane Task Force listserv. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have now reached the public comment period for this evening. Again, please note that we will not be answering your questions at this time. However, we sincerely encourage you to visit the Methane Task Force FAQ page and/or utilize that email address previously listed, in which I think it's also accessible right now in the chat. Public comment is solely the opportunity to provide you time and space to share your thoughts. But again, we will not be answering questions at this time. So how this will work is that I will alternate between the attendees that are online and those by phone. And those here on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. And for those joining us by phone, you will press *9 for English, or you'll press *1 for Spanish. Each person will have 2 minutes to speak. We will have a timer, so you will know when you can start and when you know when to conclude. And we will go in order of questions and/or comments received online and by phone. Please note that I will do my best with the pronunciation of names, and if the name and or title on your Zoom doesn't reflect how you'd like to be addressed, please let me know. With that said, we welcome you to share when you are ready, as the floor is now open to you. Next slide, please. Hi, Nico. Thank you for being here. I see that your hand is raised. You're welcome to unmute yourself and share.
Okay, sorry. Thank you guys for taking the time to do this. I just had a quick question. If you're going to be accepting the EPA's approved technology list for LDAR, does that mean that optical gas imaging could be used to meet the requirements of LDAR inspections rather than Method 21 or the sniffer, whatever you want to call it?
Thank you so much, Nico, for your inquiry this evening, and thank you again for being here. Again, we won't be responding or answering to questions. However, these slides will be made available shortly after this meeting concludes, and those email addresses that were listed on Jim and Lou's slides may be a great way for you to contact and get an answer to your question. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take a brief moment to pivot over to our phone line and ask Aldo if there's anyone on that line with a question who'd like to speak.
We don't have any question at this time, Jamie.
Okay, thank you so much, Aldo. Hi, Christian. Thank you for being here. I see your hand is raised. You're welcome to speak.
Hello, my name is Christian Bisher with the Central California Environmental Justice Network. And I guess I was hoping at these quarterly meetings, because they are so far apart, that all the major sectors of methane emissions in California would have at least a little part. And so in this meeting, the dairy sector wasn't addressed, and then the landfill sector was not. But I did attend, and I'm aware of the recent dairy sector public workshop. However, on the landfill side, the CARB website has a 2023 presentation, but there's no new information regarding like next steps. I've emailed those points of contact twice with no response, and then us, along with a couple other entities, have sent a letter, and we're just kind of looking for a status update on next steps or what's in process at CARB for landfill methane. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian, for that input and for raising that point. I really appreciate it. I apologize that things have largely been unresponsive on this end. I welcome you to drop your email address in the chat in assumption that either Lou or Jim can get back to you or find some way to be more responsive to your inquiries. So thank you. I'm going to give folks here on Zoom just about one more minute or two in case someone else would like to utilize the raise hand function to speak. Otherwise, I'm going to then pivot back over to our phone line to check in to see if anyone has any questions there. It's a very dramatic ending of the timer. I also welcome participants. If it feels more comfortable for you, you can drop your comments, questions, and/or concerns in the chat. That's also another option for you that is available. Okay, I'm going to pivot back to the phone line very quickly to see Aldo, if anyone is on the line with any questions or comments.
There is no question on the phone, Jamie.
Thank you, Aldo. So Erin, thank you for dropping your inquiry in the chat. I see you are asking what is the expected timeline for operators to comply with the amendments to the methane oil and gas regulations following CARB submittal in 2026. I'm hearing and seeing quite a few different inquiries and comments that are directed at CARB. So I please want to invite you to utilize those contact email addresses for submitting your inquiries. And I'm going to allow about 3 to maybe 5 more minutes to see if anyone would like to raise their hand, come off mute, and share anything that I'd like to share and or anything that may be dropped into the chat, and then check in with the phone line one last time before we near the end of this evening's meeting. Okay, Aldo, I'm going to look to you one last time to check to see if there's any comments or questions on the phone line.
We don't have any comment at this time on the phone.
Thank you, Aldo. Well, with that being said, it is almost 6:15, so I'm going to go ahead and close this out a little bit early. Next slide, please. So again, on behalf of the California Department of Conservation, California Natural Resources Agency, California Environmental Protection Agency, and California Air Resources Board, we sincerely appreciate you joining us this evening. We do value your time, questions, concerns, and general comments. I encourage you once more to access the links that were provided in the chat, as they may be helpful in addressing your questions and comments. And we will update the FAQ and continue to provide relevant information as all things progress. Thank you again. Have a wonderful evening and take care.